Good evening, everyone. Good evening. Thank you for joining us. Thank you. We're very pleased this evening to have Geraldine Crisci join us for our session on the effects of trauma on brain development, relevance in 2023. This session is indeed brought to you by the Alumni Association from the Factor-Inwentash Faculty of Social Work. My apologies. I nearly said social services, social work. Yes. So we'd like to start off by acknowledging where we are and whose land we are on. And then I will introduce Geraldine and she will share her presentation to us. And then we will have a few minutes for some question and answers, if there are any. So I should introduce myself. My name is Andrea Allen, and I'm the president of the Alumni Association, and we're very happy you joined us this evening. I wish to acknowledge this land on which the University of Toronto operates. For thousands of years, it has been the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, Haudenosaunee, and most recently, Mississaugas of the Credit River. Today, this land is still the home of many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island and is still the home of many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. We acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit River. We're grateful to have the opportunity to be on this land. We all have responsibilities to be active players in the decolonization of which we are currently enacting by learning, showing up, speaking up, and staying informed about the needs and desires of our Indigenous comrades. I acknowledge people like myself who were brought across the Atlantic without being given a choice, people who were brought on the transatlantic human trade ship. We must also recognize other nations who came to this land by choice through colonialism, of which some forgot that they are settlers. We give thanks to the Indigenous ancestors for their patience, but acknowledge that it has been exploited. If we could take a few moments, a few seconds, and reflect on the Indigenous people who have been misplaced as we stand on their land. We acknowledge this land and look forward to their reclamation. Thank you. So on behalf of the Alumni Association, I welcome everyone this evening. This is part of our bi-monthly events, and we're very pleased to offer a session that focuses on brain development and children, as it is an area that indeed is very dear to my heart. I began my career in children's mental health. And so we're very pleased to have with us someone who I've always, her voice, her messages has always resonated in my head when I see the more complex cases, and I remember her words. Geraldine Crisci is a master of social work, is a mental health professional with over 30 years experience in the field of trauma. She's a private practitioner who provides assessment and treatment to children, youth, and their families. She also has a professional she is also a professional trainer providing educational programs to mental health, protective services, law enforcement, medical, and other helping professions. Geraldine co-authored Paper Dolls and Paper Airplanes, Therapeutic Exercises for sexually traumatized children and has developed and teaches a 6-day trauma assessment and treatment program, of which 6,000 professionals in the past 18 years have been trained. Specializing in addressing the impact of trauma on the behavior of children and youth, she develops clinical programs to provide children, youth, and their families with corrective, effective therapeutic interventions. Geraldine is a member of the American Professional Society on the Abuse of Children. She's a member of the Association of Treatment of Sexual Abusers. She's a member with CRPO as a registered psychotherapist and a member with the Ontario Association of Social Workers as a social worker. I wanted to ask you to join me in welcoming Geraldine as she presents her topic, the effects of trauma on brain development, relevance in 2023. Over to you, Geraldine.
Thanks so much, Andrea. I really appreciate the invitation to be part of your meeting tonight. I say good evening to all of you who've joined. I'm delighted that you have the time this evening to spend with us on a topic that is also near and dear to my heart, Andrea. And I also want to thank Daniel for his great organization and technical assistance to me in this process. Big topic tonight. It's a big topic. And when I was preparing this for you, I wanted to make sure that I highlighted what I think are very important concepts to always keep in mind. It is my thought that much of this information will be familiar to everyone. And some of you will have command of this material and use it on a daily basis. So hopefully I've covered the areas that will be most useful for us in the hour that we have together tonight. So I have prepared a lot of material and it is my hope to cover it. I think I can do it. So here we go. Let's first look at relevance in 2023. In particular, thinking about the pandemic and all the changes that children have experienced. I think it's useful for us to focus on the fact that there have been many adjustments and adaptations that children and their families have had to make over the last 3 years. They have been taken out of their lives and slowly, and in some cases abruptly, put back in their lives and then taken back again. There's been a lot of change. There's been a lot of, at times, chaos for children and their families. We're really starting to understand some of that now. But the importance for us is that the pandemic was a shocking and crisis situation for people. And so whatever problems or difficulties people had pre-pandemic, this event, this current, we're 3 years into it this week, has added a layer that mental health practitioners have to be aware of. And of course, you know, I always have to say, while all of us who work in this field, whether it's in mental health or other relevant disciplines, we experience the pandemic as well at the same time as we're trying to help people through it. So it is complex. One of the results of the pandemic was social isolation, from family, from friends, from routines. And we know from the literature that social isolation often brings emotional distress. Our sense of vulnerability has been affected. We're meant to seek communal protection. We're meant to seek a way to preserve ourselves and our loved ones. And that has been shaken during the pandemic. So one of the things trauma people have had to do, those who work in the field of trauma, is the rethinking of what does connectedness mean during a time when you can't see people, when you can't be with people. We're just starting to bring people back in person. We've had to understand a new contextual level of trauma, and that new contextual level of trauma includes understanding that two of the experiences that people have had specifically due to the pandemic are feelings of grief and loss and feelings of crisis, in addition to whatever trauma they experienced during that time. So we've had to put on a number of lenses to understand the effects of the last 3 years. And when I talk about 4 lenses that could be helpful in understanding our kids, you'll see them in front of you: neurobiology, trauma, attachment, developmental. We have accumulated a ton of information over the last 50 years. And a lot of the information over the last 20 years has specifically helped us take and integrate information from various disciplines, thank you technology, so that we are able to benefit from information from neurobiology, trauma, attachment, and developmental lenses. And when we see the complex nature of some of the behavioral presentations and affective presentations of the kids and youth who are referred into us, these are the 4 areas that feed into how we try to understand what's going on. Now, all of this, all of the information that I'm talking about has to be considered within the context of the child's family experience and values, and has to be understood within the cultural values of the child and family. And if that takes 1 session or 2 sessions or every session to educate ourselves about what is the meaning to the child and the family of our intervention, of our service, of how they see their needs, then so be it. Because without understanding these contexts, we will do a disservice to the family. So I'm going to start with a really simple definition of trauma. There are many very good definitions of trauma, but I want to start with this, and this is one that I am very, very focused on because it helps us so much. If we think about trauma as an emotional shock, what that does is help us understand that it's not so much what happens to people, it's how the event or the experiences are actually experienced by the individual and what it means to them. So it's not so much getting details about what happened. We're always happy to hear whatever people want to tell us, but it's really about how people see what happened to them and what it means to them. And emotional shock is particularly important because it's when we are emotionally shocked that a ton of information is picked up by our senses. Some people describe emotional shock as when the world kind of stops, comes to a standstill. They feel like time has stopped. We hear people describe this when they've been in a car accident, or all of a sudden they are in a violent situation that had not been anticipated, or someone that they love has had a terrible crisis occur. They know the moment they heard or understood or witnessed whatever happened, And they know that moment because that's when the world did stop for their brains. It's when the primitive brain engaged to try to figure out how to help, because threat is experienced at the time of trauma. And at that time, tons of information comes into the senses: visual, auditory, tactile, sense of smell, taste. All of these inputs get stored in primitive brain memory or limbic memory. That's relevant because so many people come to us with situations that trigger behavior that becomes out of control for them and frightening for them. And those triggers are sensorial, and they are based in the moment of the emotional shock. So a lot of complex experience occurs at the time of this emotional shock. And in many ways, when we do a trauma assessment, what we're asking someone to do is define what is the emotional shock for them. What is the scariest moment? What was the most frightening moment? What was the most upsetting moment for them in that experience? Long definition for a very short definition. So I'm going to look at some things. I'm going to do a few of these little agenda type pieces. First, we're going to look at neurobiology and attachment. And the first thing we're going to pay attention to are the 4 foundational building blocks of functionality, all of which occur in the first 3 years of caregiving, birth to 3. Then we're going to look at identifying strengths and challenges facing children. Based on an integrative approach, we're going to talk about the concepts of adaptability versus resilience. And then we're going to incorporate an understanding of how interventions now focus on either stimulating or rebuilding problem areas. Because much of what we're really looking at is experience-based intervention to correct issues for kids that happened a long time ago. So the 4 building blocks I'm referring to are the 4 building blocks of functionality: affect regulation, the ability to tolerate frustration, the ability to delay gratification, and the ability to identify social cues accurately and consistently. That if a person has these 4 building blocks in place, their ability to cope is very high. These 4 building blocks are the result of secure attachment. When a family is able to provide consistency, predictability, nurturance, and attunement as that infant, baby, toddler, young preschooler is growing, the brain is able to do what it's supposed to do, which is develop structures that allow for these 4 building blocks to be part of how that child functions. Now, as you all know, most families are very challenged at one point or another in their ability to provide as much consistency and predictability as possible through no fault of their own. So even while looking at the ideal of these 4 building blocks, we always acknowledge that there are so many challenges for families that we have to take into consideration a perspective of what is reasonable. So affect regulation is a biochemical function. It's part of brain evolution. It means that you are able to manage your feelings and emotions. It's really different from anger management. We've never had better anger management programs in our lives for all age groups. And in fact, anger management programs can be seen almost as a differential diagnosis. So many times I'll have kids who eventually come to us, but they've been through 2 or 3 really good, really credible anger management programs appropriate to their age and stage of development. And they do very well on them. And then 3 weeks later, they get into a big fight at school and they get suspended. So what's happened there? Well, what's happened is that they are children who can't regulate their affect. It's not about managing anger. And there's a huge difference here. And I think it's particularly relevant to kids with complex issues. Our kids do well in anger management programs because they're in a calm environment with competent adults. The ability to carry that forward would assume that there's already some semblance of biochemical function and the child doesn't know what to do when they feel angry. And so we teach them what to do and they're able to carry it out in the community. So that works really well for lots of kids. But when it doesn't work, we have to then consider this may be a kid with an affect regulation problem. And as we are talking tonight, you may be thinking of a particularly challenging situation with a child, a youth, or even an adult, and check off if any of these 4 are issues that that person has. How do we learn to tolerate frustration? Well, we learn to tolerate frustration when our caregiving is consistent and predictable. When we're fed on time, when we're hungry, and we give our little cry to let people know, and people are able to pretty much be consistent with us, we're pretty good. We're good to go. So that when perhaps the caregiver is a little late with our feeding, we don't have to freak out because we've already established that our need is going to be met, that we already have established some consistency with our caregiver. And so we can learn to wait and not freak out because of that experience. So again, this is one of the benefits of having the kind of caregiving I'm talking about. And that ability to delay gratification is part and parcel of the same idea. To be able to wait, which is one of the things many of my children can't do, means that you have confidence and trust that at the end of the waiting period, something good's going to happen, that you can trust what's being said to you. All of you know Erickson, that's birth to 18 months. So again, that period of time is the time of very intensive caregiving. And we look to that consistency and predictability to provide that ability to grow and develop. And then reading social cues. We have great socialization programs. Again, the resources we have around this are excellent. And it's another differential diagnosis. So we have kids who go through very good programs. They do very well in the programs. They get to school and they can't make a friend or keep a friend to save their lives. What happened there? Well, a couple of things could happen. One is that they need more practice, possibly. But for many of the kids we see, the problem is, yeah, they can learn what we teach them about making friends and keeping friends, but they don't have step 1. They don't have the desire for social emotional contact. And without the desire for social emotional contact, there's nothing to build on in socialization. Now, why wouldn't they have the desire? Well, what it tells us clinically is that their association to social relationships has been toxic, that to be in relationship has been harmful. And so that's a whole different level of intervention than a socialization program. So we go to our understanding of the brain and how it works. So what's the role? The role is for the brain to process, store, and then respond to the environment in which they live. And this is one of the most important reasons for us to try to get some understanding of what life was like for this family. What was life like for these parents caregivers when they were trying to take care of this newborn infant, baby, toddler. Understanding the caregiving environment and what supports or lack of supports a family had is quite critical to answering the question, what did this kid's brain process, store, and respond to when the brain was growing and developing? The goal of the brain is to maintain stability. So very often people will refer kids in to us who are bolting out of classrooms and running into the street and doing very high risk behaviors. Well, from a trauma and neurobiology point of view, what that means to me is that there's something unsafe in the classroom and the brain does not feel stable in the classroom. So it seeks stability by leaving the classroom. Now, you and I know this is maladaptive behavior and quite high risk. However, to clinically intervene, we have to know, is that the function of this behavior to maintain stability? Because if it is, we're not going to do anything with the child initially. We're going to work with the teacher and we're going to try to figure out a precipitant to the bolting, which people often say, oh, it's impossible. It just happens anytime. And it, you know what, it doesn't. There's usually a precipitant. But when you're a teacher and you have 35 kids, it's really hard to figure this out without support. But here's the point. Many kids do this kind of behavior because teacher might raise his or her voice. You know, teachers have to raise their voices. It's a fact of life. Doesn't mean anyone's in danger, but a voice raising for some of our children is associated to harm. As soon as that voice goes up, the brain says, uh-oh, get out of there. Someone's going to get hurt. So this is just an example of how paying attention to what we know about brains helps us to look at the behavior of kids and understand that in a way where we can be most effective. So how do we get kids stable? Well, that's the consistency, predictability, nurturance, and enrichment, ways to grow and develop. So even if we've got a 10-year-old today and maybe their whole family struggled a lot during these early years, if we put in and help the family and support the family to now put in consistency, predictability, nurturance, enrichment, we're going to see a movement towards stability. And why are we so crazy about stability? Because stability is the foundation for resilience. And so we're trying to build a brain that serves the child well. When there's a foundation for resilience, we have an organized brain. You know, when people say to me, who do you see in your practice? I say, well, for the most part, we see children with disorganized brains. They're really smart for the most part. They're very gifted. They have a lot of strengths, but their unstable early histories resulted in disorganization in the brain, and therefore they're not coping well. That doesn't mean we can't help them. We absolutely can. My bias is we can help every child. The onus is on us to figure out how. Now, the easiest way to have a truly resilient child is to have a securely attached child. And that's that's wonderful if you can get it, but a lot of our kids don't have that advantage. So flip side of the coin, when there's chaos or threat or trauma, we have instability. I don't think that's hard to understand for any of us, or certainly for the people we work with. And instability is problematic because it results in developmental disruption. So the little developmental tasks and milestones that are important to building up the child's abilities get all disrupted. That's why we can have a 15-year-old, when confronted with conflict, behave like a 3-year-old or a 2-year-old. When people say to me, you know what, I have an 11-year-old, he's a real behavior problem, we'd like to send him for therapy. Every time he's upset, he throws himself on the floor and kicks and screams and does all of this. And I have to say to people, that's not an 11-year-old. He may be chronologically 11, but you're describing a toddler. And appreciating where developmental disruption has occurred for these kids is quite crucial to intervening in a place where they can actually grow and learn and develop. So I took myself away from the topic. Instability leads to developmental disruption, which leads to the disorganized brain that I've been referring to. Now, this is some of what we know from the research that's been done. So the brains of infants raised in an environment that's unpredictable or worse, dangerous or threatening, develop differently. Abnormal really refers to differently. We know this because of the comparison of brain scans of children raised in calmness and children raised in dangerous or threatening environments. Chaos, neglect, pervasive fear, and direct violence in early childhood results in disorganized and underdeveloped brains. And why is that important to know? Because we do know something about how to help reorganize and facilitate development in the brain, no matter how old somebody is. And so one of the reasons I think this is an important piece of information is because we want people to understand when children present with severe behavioral disturbance, it's not their fault. It's the result of deficits that we can actually help them recoup. But we have to understand where they're coming from. And then we move to some of the attachment material and we look at what can we expect based on attachment style, based on what the child and the caregivers are able to manage birth to 3. Secure attachment's great. It's great. Now, we don't see, for the most part in our mental health programs, whether they're community-based, whether they're in a day treatment setting, whether they're inpatient, in general, in mental health, we don't see many securely attached kids because they don't need us. And they don't need us because they are fortunate enough to have those 4 building blocks in place. They can be, discipline problems and that sort of thing. But in general, what we see from securely attached kids are kids who can accept authority, they can cooperate, they anticipate pleasure, really wonderful aspects. But when we move away from secure attachment, where we have kids who might be in an anxious attachment, kids who lived in unpredictability and inconsistency, we see highly anxious kids who have a very difficult time really having any solid relationships with adults or kids. Then we move into the avoidant attachment situation where the infant, toddler, young preschooler has experienced rejection and punishment. Now, this doesn't mean necessarily that the caregiver intended to be rejecting and punitive. But remember, we're talking about newborns, infants, babies, toddlers, and not having your needs met is a form of rejection if you're 6 months old. Not having your needs met is a form of punishment if you're 14 months old, because you have no way of understanding why you're still hungry, you're wet, you're dirty, you don't feel well, you're scared, and no one is helping you. And so the avoidant attachment kids grow up with big chips on their shoulders and get into a lot of difficulty in our systems. And then we have the last category. These are 4 research categories that have been studied for over 100 years in various forms globally. And this disorganized attachment category has really a combination of anxious and avoidant attachment pieces to it. And what we see in these kids is ongoing conflict between whether to stay or whether to go. They drive people crazy. They drive their families crazy. They drive their caregivers in other settings crazy. They drive their helpers crazy because they're always fluctuating. They're so changeable. And it's because they don't know what to do. They just don't know what to do, and they're not confident to make a decision. This is perhaps one of the most important studies that has been done. Many of you may be familiar with it. It's out of the University of Minnesota. Strofe and Carlson, Alan Strofe and Betsy Carlson oversaw this 30-year longitudinal study. As all of you know, it's very unusual to have a 30-year longitudinal study. They studied attachment, obviously. They learned many things. In your list of references, you will see the book, The Development of the Person. This is one publication that came out of this study. Many articles have come out of it. But I drew out just one aspect of the study that I thought might be of interest to you. And it's the question of, can parent-child attachment in the next generation be predicted by assessing the attachment of a 12-month-old baby and his or her primary caregiver? So can you observe and assess the attachment of that 1-year-old and their primary and predict what kind of parent that 1-year-old is going to be in the next generation? And the answer turned out to be yes, you can. This is what they found out. No surprise with securely attached kids. They became reliably attuned caregivers. That's what we would expect. And they have the capacity for empathy, which of course makes them really good citizens and neighbors and friends. For the inconsistent or anxiously attached kids, they developed diagnosable anxiety disorders when they grew up, and therefore had anxious attachments to their kids. The avoidant category grew up to have conduct problems, most specifically oppositional defiant disorder. Now, this is a very important finding because certainly, I think just about every child and youth that's referred to our program has ADHD and ODD. Those are the two kind of standards, and then they might have other diagnoses as well. And they certainly do meet the criteria for these categories. There's no question about that. But from a clinical point of view, if I'm looking at a child who's been diagnosed ODD, and I'm aware through my assessment that this is an avoidantly attached child, I'm going to do something really different with him. I'm not going to even consider a consequence model. I'm not going to consider a level system with him in his school or program. I'm going to try and facilitate people giving him what he did not have growing up, which is unconditional love. And that does not go down well. I can tell you it's not a popular recommendation, but clinically, it actually works. So if a kid comes, in and says, has been in trouble at school, and the caregiver says, look, you did this and that, and I want you to go in tomorrow, apologize to the teacher, and ask how you can make up for this. Or I'm going to take away your devices. This is the kid who will look straight at you in the face and say, I don't care. These are the I don't care kids. Now, I don't care is something that adults hate to hear, and it escalates us. So we get out of control pretty easily. So then the ante goes up. Well, you all go and apologize, or I'm taking those devices away for a month. Well, this does not faze the kid, because the kid looks at you and says, I don't care. And here's the thing, why don't they care? They don't care because they learned, this is a child who learned a long time ago that caring got them nowhere, and in fact hurt quite a bit. And so their ability to say, I don't care, protects them. So this is the child that I would advise, and again, I'm telling you, it's not popular when I advise this. I advise people to say things like, you know what? I know I've been called. I know you got into a whole thing with your teacher. I don't know what your ideas are about what you might or might not do about that. Whatever you do, I will support you, and walk away. Very unpopular. But I will tell you that when people can do this and do it consistently and not get into a power struggle, these are the kids you never want to get into a power struggle with, because you're going to lose. Why? Because the fact that they survived their circumstances tells you how strong their ability is to resist having anything you say influence them. So in any event, just trying to give you an example of how important it is to really know who you're dealing with and what is that underlying dynamic. And then lastly, the category of disorganized attachment. Those kids grew up with diagnoses of dissociation, clinical dissociation, and borderline personality disorder. Now, again, very useful information, because from my point of view, if the borderline personality disorder person, if you use that as a category, meets criteria for that, but we know they're from a disorganized attachment, now we see them completely differently. Now we're looking at really unmet infantile needs. So of course, they might see someone for an hour and be perfectly fine, leave the office and leave you scathing voice messages and threaten to turn you into your college, and then come back and apologize, not know what they did. That kind of behavior, in my mind, if we put an attachment lens on, this is about extreme anxiety at being separated from that therapist. So weekly, even twice a week therapy is not really what this person needs. We're looking much more at a day treatment program for this type of person, and possibly an inpatient for a period of time program, until this person feels secure enough to separate from the helper. So all I'm saying, and I know nobody's going to fund this for me, I think it's a great idea, but no one's asked me. But what I'm saying is that depending on the accuracy of your assessment on what you're seeing, you're going to understand someone's needs differently. And the development of that treatment intervention is therefore going to be different. This is a quote from Bruce Perry, who many of you, if not all of you, are familiar with. He made this statement 20 years ago, and I can tell you he was really attacked for it. His statement is, children are not resilient, children are malleable. Now, we all know that the truth is somewhere in between. But what he was trying to point out is that some children who come through with these complex needs look resilient, but what we're actually looking at is their survival skills, and they are malleable, meaning that they will change their circumstances to accommodate new challenges. Why is that important? What's the difference? Well, the difference is if you're truly resilient, you can bounce back from adversity. But if you're malleable, you don't have that foundation of internal resources. And when do we see it? When they turn 12 and 13. And, the peer group becomes more influential. And these are the kids that follow, the little groups that end up in the juvenile justice system. This is why we get concerned about really trying to take a hard look, always trying to focus on strengths, always trying to build resiliency, but taking a careful look at, is this a child who has simply adjusted and become malleable to his circumstances, or is he truly resilient? Can he truly bounce back? Okay, so everybody can take a deep breath here. We're bringing in mindfulness research now, because sometimes people get a little overwhelmed at how much there is to do out there. But here's the bottom line from my clinical point of view. Every person who is in a helping role, no matter what the role is, no matter what the program is, no matter how short or how long your involvement is, every one of us has the ability to help. And this one piece of the many pieces of extraordinarily useful information from mindfulness research really helps to focus that idea. So each time we have an interaction that leads someone to calm, what we have done is we have provided a way for that person to internally soothe. Why is that important? Because many of the kids and youth, and for that matter, adults that all of us encounter, are trying to self-soothe, don't know how, and end up self-soothing in very harmful ways, whether it be through substances or high-risk behaviors, any number of ways that are maladaptive. So if through connection, through being there, through that term emotional presence, through our being there, even for a moment, if it results in a calming, we have helped that kid's brain to experience internal soothing. And that's never going to go away. Anything you do to help is not going to go away. It's going to be something that can be built upon by you or other people who are thinking in this way. Now, why is it important? Because without support, those regulatory fibers in the brain don't have the opportunity to develop soothing fibers. So we're really talking about brain growth and brain development when we talk about interpersonal connection that results in calming. When someone is calm, those regulatory fibers have an opportunity to develop soothing fibers. So connection, interpersonal soothing, this all matters. And that's why, when we work with the crisis workers in our school systems, I know they only have sometimes 3 minutes with a kid, literally. But I know in that 3 minutes, they can do a lot of good work. Not everyone has the opportunity to see kids ongoingly, and many kids don't have to be seen ongoingly, but they have to be seen by people with this awareness. Okay, let's move on to our next agenda. And that is addressing that symptomatic behavior that is presented to us as problematic. This kid has these symptoms, these are problem behaviors. Let's talk about addressing that kind of behavior effectively by utilizing that trauma lens approach, which means we're redefining symptoms by their functionality. How does this symptom function to protect the child? You can look at enuresis in many different ways. If there's no physical or medical basis to bedwetting, then we look at things with a trauma lens, like if the child bedwets, in their primitive brain, do they think, and it is primitive, so it's not conscious, well, if I'm stinky of urine, no one's going to come in and do anything to me in the middle of the night. Now, we've had enough cases of both enuresis and encopresis to know that both of those behaviors serve protective functions for numbers of children. And without looking at that behavior through a trauma lens and through its functionality, these kids have gotten all kinds of symptom management help, but have not solved the problem. And so we need to assess accurately so that that assessment information can be translated into an effective treatment plan. So if the issue is the child is afraid at night, we're going to build safety around the child so they don't need to bedwet or defecate in their beds. We're going to address the functionality of the behavior, not just look at it as a behavior that needs to be corrected. Next concept, coping skills versus symptomatic behavior. So from a trauma lens, we see all symptomatic behavior as a coping skill, maladaptive as it might be. In the symptom checklist that we do with our youth in our trauma assessments, the symptom checklist is called coping skills, because we want to introduce the idea that even when you have behaviors that don't serve you well, you have them for a reason. And part of our job is to figure out how they help you, even though they're making your life miserable. Somehow your primitive brain thinks they're helping. Oh, sorry. Which leads us to the concept of intentional versus non-intentional behavior. Adults get very irritated when they think a child is intentionally misbehaving. And if we can just help adults see that with many of the children that we serve, yes, their behavior has an effect on other people, but it is not necessarily intentional. It is often out of their conscious mind. This helps parents, school teachers, other adults take a step back and have a little more compassion for the behavior. We try to introduce the idea that behaviors like hoarding, lying, stealing are indicative of neglect, whereas very often people are seeing these in very negative ways. Let's just take hoarding for a moment. They hoard food all the time, even though they're permitted to have as much food as they want. They have permission, they have sanction, we have food available. And there's still stuff in food in the heating vents and under their mattresses. When I tell them they can eat, they say, oh, I know, and that's great, and thank you. And then they still do the behavior. Well, hoarding in a trauma lens, hoarding is a behavior that tells us, let's bring in our neurobiology, that at some point in this kid's pre-verbal life, they experienced near starvation. Now, people will say, well, no one ever tried to starve that kid. Yeah, that's great. But remember that when you're talking newborn, infant, baby, toddler, you feel like you're starving if you skip one meal. Why? Because that's how dependent that age group is on all of the nutrients that they get in their feedings. And so the primitive brain, one meal skipped, two meals skipped, unpredictability in being fed, primitive brain is afraid the kid's going to starve to death. And so, yes, we have developed some really effective interventions for this, but it's based on understanding what the hoarding is about. It's a subconscious behavior. It's about the primitive brain, making sure the kid will never starve again. It's working through an intervention that says the hoarding behavior is a way the brain is trying to protect the kid. And nothing that we consciously try to dictate is going to get at that. We do experiential kinds of work with that type of behavior. But many people see these behaviors. Lying is really about misperception with many of our kids. Their perceptions are very different than ours if they come from high neglect. Stealing. How many kids steal from other kids at school? They're always in other kids' backpacks. Well, are they stealing? Are they sitting there thinking, I'm going to steal this kid's cell phone? Or what we're seeing is a kid who, when they pick up someone else's stuff that is shiny and nice, they have a self-soothing. Is it maladaptive? Yes. Is it wrong? Yes. Do we have to correct it? Yes. But knowing the motivation helps us decide how we're going to help that kid. How are we going to help them self-soothe in more acceptable ways so they're not drawn to these other ways? And the concept of attention seeking versus attachment seeking. Now, attention seeking has a very bad reputation. Though I have to say, especially as a trainer, we all seek attention. I mean, what is it when you sit in front of, a number of people and talk? That's sort of attention seeking. But the real issue here is our kids, when they are always following adults, when they really can't sit down and separate themselves, when they're trying to talk to you when you're at your busiest. This is about attachment seeking. This is about trying to make up for the attachment that was missing in their earlier lives. We do so many trainings and programs with residential staff on this issue specifically because they see it the most because they live with these kids. But that's where we can correct the behavior. That's where we can actually give these kids what they need, which is direct eye contact, soft face, warmth, smiles, be with them, as opposed to, you have to be doing something else. Be with them. Why? Because they soothe, they calm, and they learn. So introducing to people this concept that some of this very annoying behavior, granted, is actually motivated by a very important clinical need. Some of the behaviors that are indicative of attachment seeking are described regularly as manipulative, controlling, and instigating. I can tell you from my 30 plus years experience, and I hate to tell you how long it really is, I don't like to think about that, but my kids are no more capable of true manipulation than my kitty is. In fact, my kitty might be more capable. Why? Because manipulation requires very high executive functioning. My kids are developmentally too young. I don't care how old they are. They're developmentally, emotionally too young to manipulate. They're trying in their foolishness and what seems to be a big setup. They're simply trying to connect with those adults in their very clumsy, ill-informed ways. And the controlling piece is, again, anxiety based on lack of connection. So give them what they need. Give them the connection. Give them the time. Don't separate them out. Don't put them off program. That's the worst thing you can do with these kids. That's going to escalate them, and then they're going to destroy their room, and then we're going to get mad at them for destroying their room. When the issue is they need to be closer to us, even when they're annoying us. And instigating, same kind of thing. I don't need to review that. So I did have a 7-year-old once say to me, I always say to kids, why do you think you're here? And this little 7-year-old said to me, because I instigate. And I said, gosh, that's a big word. What does instigate mean? And he said, I don't know, but the staff say it to me all the time. I thought it was hilarious. He was 7, for goodness sake. Anyway, so why are we talking about this? Because when we understand internal working models, which is part of attachment theory, we all develop an internal working model for how we relate to other people. And that internal working model is based on how we experience our primary caregivers. Now, the thing about it is, we learn some good things. We might learn some maladaptive things. Doesn't matter in the moment. That what I'd like to get across here is that when we see many of these behaviors, we have to remember that this internal working model that the child is trying to connect, doesn't know how to connect. The child is trying desperately to attach, doesn't know how to do it appropriately. Those models are encoded in the child's procedural memory and are thus pre-verbal, which means the child is not aware. Many adults are not aware of their internal working models because it's in procedural memory. So again, to give pause, to give space, to bring some compassion to the situations that these kids find themselves in. So again, the significance, much of the behavior that really upsets people and irritates them is not intentional. Why are we talking about it? Because misinterpretation of behavior creates barriers to growth and development. If we are not accurate about what we're saying and what it means, then we are absolutely not going to give them the most effective intervention that will facilitate growth and development. They may be emotionally 4 at age 14, but we can grow them up. We can grow them up from 4 to 14, and it's not going to take 10 years, I can assure you, if we meet them where they actually are, which is a very old concept that social work has promoted. We've already done this. Without support, regulatory fibers don't have the opportunity to develop soothing fibers. And that moves us into what we've referred to many times, but let's talk about a little bit more. What is limbic reactivity? So basic definition, limbic reactivity results when the amygdala is triggered to respond to a perceived danger, which sets off the adaptive hyperarousal system. So the kid, in vernacular, goes cuckoo. And the important thing here is perceived danger. We may not see it. They may not be able to define it or identify it, but the amygdala is definitely reacting to it. These are your references for that notion. Why are kids limbically reactive? I know this is not your most appealing graphic. It is the best graphic we have of the front limbic system. Couple of points here. The limbic system is more plastic than the brainstem. You know, there are 3 parts to our brain: brainstem, limbic, and cognition or cortex. But the limbic system is experience dependent. And that's critical, because if you have a kid with a limbic reactivity problem, the intervention has to be experiential as opposed to cognitive. Why are we talking about this limbic system? Because the limbic forebrain is responsible for the experience and expression of emotions, including pleasure, rage, fear, and joy, and the all-important desire for social emotional contact. Limbic system nuclei require considerable social, emotional, perceptual, and cognitive stimulation during the first several months and years of life in order to develop normally. And that's why you can see in environments where the child is in a high neglect or threatening environment, where the caregivers are struggling and are having difficulties providing the emotional piece, you can see why we have a limbic system that ends up being quite immature. And we're looking at it, and we need to know about it, all of us who are helping kids, because the limbic system provides the foundation for all aspects of social and emotional behavior. So we have to know about it. And our last piece, developmental approaches. So looking at situations and behaviors from a developmental lens, replacing strict behavioral models with mindful connection. We need to know a lot of stuff and apply it, matching need to approach. So behavioral models have saved many a child and have escalated many a child. So it's about the match and outlining how the developmental approach applies to treatment. Doesn't matter if you're in a regular classroom, a day treatment program, a family setting. Developmental approach can be extremely helpful. So what do we have to remember? Well, one, some of us have a lot of child development background. Some of us have less, but all the child development theory, which is critically important, we do have to know as much about child development as possible, but we have to remember that child development theory is based on research with securely attached kids. And so when we have kids who are not securely attached, it's important to make those adjustments in our expectations of what they can do and how quickly they can do it. We don't want there to be a gap between the expectation that a parent, a school, any other helper has, and the kid's ability to meet that expectation. So we're always thinking through adaptations. Again, we're focusing on functional developmental level, not how old are they really. We're always asking ourselves, how old is this kid really emotionally? Our theory is trauma as an emotional shock results in developmental arrest. So we're always looking to see where is this kid developmentally. One of the easiest ways to figure kids out in terms of their developmental level is by looking at types of play. You know, the first stage of play is watch me. If you have a baby to mid-toddlerhood, this is the rule. When they say play, play, or pay, pay, what they want is for you to sit and watch them. My goodness, don't you dare touch anything of theirs. You just watch. That's what play is for that age group. You may know adults who are still watching me play. I don't know. But anyway, parallel play. When they allow you, this is usually mid-toddlerhood, 18 months to 2 years, when they want you to sit next to them and play. So playing at that point is you sit next to them with your own toys. Again, don't touch their stuff. But you're allowed to sit next to them. You are playing something, they're playing something. That's parallel play. We look for that transition. And what we're always aiming for is that interactive playability, that they can actually give and take. And then we know the kid's on the right track. Many of the kids that we see who are in difficulty, who are anywhere from 5 to 13 years of age, have not reached interactive play yet. So it's a quick little look at development from a play development point of view. Some of the social abilities we expect by interactive play are taking turns and sharing, two very unpopular concepts. But we know that relationships which honor subjective experience thrive. Translation: when we accept the child, the youth, the adult where they are, where they actually are, when we honor their subjective experience, how they see things, what it means to them, then we provide that door, that opportunity for them to thrive. So we always start with where people are. We accept people for where they are. Therapeutic intervention has to change the brain or there are no lasting effects. So we have to pay attention to where are those disorganized points or step points, because that's where we're going to try to help this kid. We are paying attention to the impact of developmental arrest. What are we seeing in this 11-year-old? Is there an 18-month-old part? How are we going to grow that up? And intervention has to take into account the emotional age of that person. Are there unmet infantile needs? Are we looking at toddler behavior? Are we looking at preschool behavior, latency behavior, early adolescent behavior? What are we looking at? Let's really put that developmental lens on. And finally, we get to specific approaches to specific situations. Now, these two little, I hope you find them cute, graphics. We don't usually see a little chick on a kitten's neck. We don't usually see a lion grooming a baby deer or fawn. But what this speaks to is how important it is to match approach to the needs of the child. We have never had better interventions. We have never had more evidence-based interventions than we have today. We're very fortunate. the art in mental health work is matching the child to the intervention. So while we do the range from trauma-focused CBT through EMDR, through all types of parenting and attachment programs, we do a lot of basic experiential growing into organized brain activity approaches, because we've got to get the kids to the point where they're calm enough and engaged enough to take advantage of some of the more advanced therapies. So we're always trying to adapt what we have to the needs of that child. So many kids come to us and we do our assessment, and our kids are not in any shape yet to take advantage of, let's say, a trauma-focused CBT program. You know, in many ways, many approaches that work very well, because we do have the evidence for that. But I liken them to a graduate level program, and my kids are in kindergarten. And so that gap has to be bridged before they can take advantage of those programs. I'm preparing them for those programs, but they do have to be prepared. So hopefully I have in this hour given you some information that is useful to you and to your thinking and to your work. And you're not sitting there thinking, what was she talking about this whole time? Oh my goodness, it's so confusing. So I'm finished with a formal presentation. You have numbers of references in the last 4 slides. Hopefully we'll cover your interests, and I'm happy to answer any questions you might have. Are there any questions?
They can put it in the chat, or if they unmute themselves, that would be okay.
Yep. Whatever you would like.
Yes.
Or you might be asleep. I don't know. You know, it's approaching 8 o'clock. It's been a long day for most people.
No, it was very, very, very affirming for me.
Okay, good, good.
Very, very affirming. I am one of those people who always focuses on the developmental stage, not necessarily the chronological age. It doesn't mean very much to me. But I appreciate very much the review and refreshers and affirmation in terms of honoring the subjective experience of our clients.
That's great. And that is always my hope, that this will be an opportunity for people to reflect on their own work, that it will be affirming, that it might lead you in a direction that's useful to what you do and how you do it.
Thank you. Yes.
Yeah.
We have a couple questions. People are asking if they'll have access to the slides. Yes. Oh, the slides. You'll have access to this on the FIFSW website. There is a question. When a child is older, say preteen, does trauma still have a significant impact on the subsequent brain development?
That's a very good question. So the impact has already, well, is the trauma historical or current would be my first question. If what we're looking at is how much brain development took place before the trauma occurred, and if it's a current trauma at 14, if that particular youth has a fairly well organized brain and comes from a secure attachment, that youth has a far better chance of fully recovering more quickly than a child who doesn't have those advantages. So I don't know if that answers your question or not, or if you have more information that might help me answer it better.
So that was Olivia. Next question is Carrie. And she's asking if you could talk a little bit about how you would prepare to stabilize a child for programs?
Oh, that's a really good question. Stabilization for me is defined as the child being able, or the youth being able to incorporate a routine where they are sleeping pretty well, eating pretty well, startle responses down considerably. We can see that they are experiencing calm moments, if not calmness, for periods of time. And stability is essential. Safety and stability are essential before a true assessment and effective intervention plan can take place. So it is quite a good question to ask. And very often, it's not enough to just, and I'm not minimizing this, but if it's youth is in, or a child is in an unsafe situation and they're placed in a safe situation, that's a great beginning. But once they are physically safe, we have to make sure they're emotionally safe. And we do that through observation and talking with them, really knowing when they seem to be startling, whether or not they're able to sleep, whether or not they're eating, all of the physical stuff. And then we work towards stability. So by providing consistent, predictable, nurturant, attuned environment, we're looking for that child or youth to stabilize in the basic areas: sleep, eating, startle response, ability to calm, ability to ask for help when they need it, that sort of thing. Hopefully I answered your question. Children are often sent for assessment when they're not stable. And I understand why they are, because when we are able to refer, we want to do it and get it done, but it's not always in the child's best interest. Sorry, go ahead.
Or maybe accurate, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because if they're triggered in that moment, it doesn't necessarily tell us very much.
Right.
Question from Nicole. Thank you very much for taking your time to speak with us. A wonderful reminder about being compassionate in these difficult situations. I am wondering about, in the context of short-term, 5 to 10 sessions, what would be the main skills/tools you would want to make sure to share with the child, youth, or family? Of course, knowing this is not a one approach for all.
Yeah, great question. Thank you. I think I would go for that child or youth experiencing calm connection, such that they were able to learn that with you can actually achieve calmness with different people, and that the ability to practice saying what's going on with them. You know what, I feel nervous today, or I don't like how I feel today, or this doesn't feel real to me today. That they feel safe enough with your time with them, that they learn to name what's going on and learn to ask for what they need. Because those two pieces keep them healthy. You know, when we look at all of the research that was done on how do you create mental wellness, mental illness boiled down to the lack of two very important skills. And I'm not talking about biochemically based mental illness, but difficulties coping, difficulties with conflict and stress. And those two abilities were the ability to generate creative alternatives. So if a kid can say to you, I'm just not feeling that right today, then we can teach them to think about what might be all the things that go into that. Yeah, well, because I can't really talk to my mother. Let's think about a number of ways to approach your mother. Giving them creative problem solving skills is one area that really helps keep people out of trouble. And the other big area is the ability to access social support. And so if they can become, that kid can become comfortable with you in that 5 to 10 sessions, bringing to you their worries or their concerns or their questions, then they're practicing gaining social support. And part of the conversation would be who in the community of their friends or their neighbors or their relatives or their teachers are people who they can go to with their concerns or questions. Hopefully that's helpful.
Mm. Thank you. Another question. Susanna knows a teenager who had a good toddler development, but then lost her mother at elementary school age. She is now experiencing many social issues. When we try to correct her behavior, she said exactly what you mentioned. I don't care, or I don't need friends. She's attending therapy, but she said CBT doesn't help her. How should we approach in giving her the proper therapy?
Well, that's rather complex. It's a great little case example, I must say. So I'm not sure how we know that she had a stable first 3 years, but assuming she did, we need to look at the significance of the loss of her parent. And certainly children under 10 are still so dependent on parental guidance, love, support, direction, that it is very difficult to come back from those losses. But the other piece, putting on a trauma lens, the other piece is really ensuring that the child has no sense at all of responsibility for the mother's death. And I don't mean, some of the more obvious things, but is this a child who thinks that she could have done something to help her mother? Is this a child who has regrets that maybe the last time she saw her mother, she was mean to her? Is this a child who, I don't know anything about how the mother died or what was going on, but if the mother was sick, there were times when the child really didn't want to go and see the mother, didn't want to spend time with her, things that would tie the child to regrets of things they could have done differently. When we see people struggling to recover in any way, now some losses, most losses, we're not just going to get over in any way, shape, or form, but we are going to integrate those losses. That's the idea, is we integrate the experience so that we can, move on with our lives, not lose the person or our feelings for them. But the one thing that interferes most often in what we see in our work, because we get referrals from grief programs who have worked, very credible, excellent grief programs that help thousands of people, but they'll come across someone who just can't move forward and doesn't find the services that are being offered helpful. They send them to us because they're concerned that there might be some sense of responsibility, which would certainly tie them to a belief system that wouldn't allow them to recover. So part of, trauma assessment is trying to identify how that person's thinking about. So with this kid, how does she think about her mom's, the loss of her mom? And what are her thoughts about what might be different, or could have been different for her mother? What does she think about all this stuff? And I don't know, she sounds like a very interesting child. So I don't know if that helps or not. But one very significant loss to may or may not have good information on her upbringing. But 3, there may be something we don't know that is eating away at this kid. Hope that's helpful.
Thank you. Let's try and squeeze in one more. It just came up. This will be our last question for the evening.
Okay.
It just popped up. It's from Effie, and it says, to create an attachment other than secure, how inconsistent do things have to be? For example, how often do meals have to be missed? Can you tell attachment is going awry while still in the 0 to 3 years?
That's a great question. And I wish I had a very definitive answer for you, because then I would probably be a gazillionaire. But the younger the child, the more important consistent feeding is. So, you know, if inadvertently a meal is missed or is late, but everything else is fairly predictable and consistent, we're not going to worry about it. We're really talking about patterns of caregiving here. So caregivers struggling to meet the needs of the baby. Maybe the caregiver is struggling with their own clinical depression. Maybe they're struggling with substance use. Maybe they're struggling with any number of fears or threatening situations in their lives and are having trouble really managing any kind of consistency. I think there are many ways to look at the 0 to 3 population, and I work with a couple of 0 to 6 programs, and this is exactly what we are trying to look at very specifically, are protocols to identify when things have gone awry in the early development. Because of course they can't tell you with words, but they tell you by their behavior, they tell you by their affect, they tell you by how they interact with caregivers and other people. And so it's through those observations that we try to understand what might be going on. And of course, in every 0 to 6 program, we're supporting the caregiver as much as possible.
Fabulous. Thank you very much, Geraldine.
You're
Thank you,
welcome.
everyone. We stayed together up to the end, and this was really excellent. There's a number of thank yous and excellent presentations in the chat. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. We really appreciate you sharing your knowledge. Thank you.
Very
Have a good
welcome.
evening, everyone.
Thank you so much, everyone. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye-bye now.
Bye-bye.